Can my podcast have two different types of formats? Well, first, I think we need to define what a format is and then determine whether or not it will be beneficial for you, your podcast listeners, and your podcast itself. That's all coming up next. Hey there, podcaster. My name is Shannon, radio broadcaster, podcaster, and podcast producer. Today's video is brought to you by my monetization guide. I've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. It's my 6 clever ways to monetize a podcast. As you can see, it's a guide that I have been writing out. I work on it just a little bit every day, a couple pages a day, so that I can finish it up just for you. So if you're looking to monetize your podcast and you need some tips on what you can do to monetize your podcast, this guide will definitely help you out. Just go ahead and click the link down in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or I'll go ahead and leave a link or I think it's a card that will be up here that will pop out so that you can go ahead and be taken to that page and download it. Now, you'll be getting a condensed version of it at first, and until I get ready to release this expanded version, you'll just have the condensed version, but you'll be on the waiting list to get it, and it will be free for those of you who get on my email list. And then after I release it, it will be going up for sale. So I recommend and urge you to go ahead and download the condensed version so you can get the expanded version after a little while, okay? So today we're talking about whether or not we can have two different styles of formats within our podcast. And this is actually a question that comes off of Twitter. Now, forgive me, and I think he knows this because I have responded back to this person in email back and forth. And we're just going to call him Shiv because Shiv is out of India. And he left this comment or this tweet for me just earlier this last week on February 1st. And he says, "Hey, Shannon, I've been binge watching your YouTube videos all this week and have a question. How advisable or not is it to have two different kinds of formats of content in a single podcast? For example, a solo talking and an interview content uploaded in alternate weeks to the same channel?" That's a really good question, and thank you so much for sharing that with me, Shiv. And forgive me if I say your name wrong. I just don't like saying people's names wrong. I like to get them right, and it's a respect thing for me. So to answer your question, let's go ahead and talk about first what is a format. I know that there's different definitions of format, and we need to really kind of define that. Now, when I think of format for podcast purposes only, what I'm thinking of is the style, basically the style of podcasting that we're doing. So you might have a solo podcast where you're talking just alone and you're sharing your thoughts and your ideas out. So that's a solo format that you would be using. Then you have the interview style format, which would be maybe you and a guest and you're just doing the interviews, or maybe it's you and a co-host and you're doing that type of format for yourself. Or maybe you have the storytelling format where it's a little more produced and there's a lot more editing that goes into that. Now, you could define format in many different ways, but this is how I define format. And one of the things that I think that is important when you decide or you think that you want to do a different style of format is that you need to think about, are you changing the topic of your podcast? This is a really important thing that you have to understand, because when you start your podcast and you're thinking about, okay, well, what do I want to talk about? And I know there's a ton of you out there that say to me, I want to talk about a little bit about everything. And I totally get what you're saying. You have thoughts on so many things, but when it comes down to your podcast, you should be podcasting, in my opinion, and it's just really kind of an obvious thing. You should be podcasting about the one thing that you're really good about. I've talked about this in the past before, and I'm going to continue to talk about it. And the reason why I say this is that you need to stay within the niche is because when people go and look inside of iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever, they're going into specific niches. They're going into specific categories. Think about how whenever you look for a podcast, you go into a specific category, and that category is going to be maybe business, or maybe it's going to be health and wellness, maybe it's nutrition, maybe it's in video gaming, it could be in comic books, anything like that. So you have to kind of respect how, I guess, Apple and Spotify and all these other little podcast syndication platforms are, how they're categorizing the content. So make sure, number one, that you are staying within your niche. So for the example of this particular question, I know that Shiv is a photographer, so he wants a podcast that is probably based all around photography. So stay within the niche. Now, as far as format is concerned, whether it should be a solo podcast or it should be interview based, you can do either or. I mean, there are going to be times whenever you don't have a guest and you won't be able to release a podcast with a guest for, the next 3 weeks. Maybe it's just a solo podcast. So yes, you can definitely do this. People won't expect it, but I will tell you this right now. People will expect that the content is going to be helping them out. So if you're creating a podcast for photographers that will help other photographers, make sure that your content is helping other photographers out. All right. That's going to be the most important thing. If you are doing a podcast that is around, this was a question that was asked earlier this week to me. These guys are doing a podcast based around, I believe, comic book and the Marvel series of movies. And so they watch the movies and then they go and they kind of do a commentary on that. You can definitely do that. You could either be interview based or it could be a collaboration between all of you guys. But what you have to remember is that you need to maintain quality content that will either entertain your audience or it will educate your audience. When we think about content that we create and we put out on the internet, we are either educating or we are entertaining them. It's just, that's the way it is. So if you're wildly entertaining, people are probably going to come back. If you're just looking for this, maybe to help people out, help other photographers out, make sure that you're sharing tips out that work for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way, but they will be tips that work for you, and maybe they will help other photographers advance and move into the next level of their photography career. There's a really great book that I recommend to photographers, to anyone who's like maybe doing a little side hustle. And it's a book called Utility by Jay Baer. It's spelled Y-O-Utility, so utility. And it's basically talking about how you can create content that helps other people out so that they can continue coming back to you. In fact, my entire YouTube channel is based around that book. It's based around the concepts and the philosophy of that book. So I recommend that you go and you read that book because it's really going to help you out tremendously when it comes down to creating quality content that people will want to look for. Now, let's talk about multiple programs within a feed. Let's talk about maybe expanding that format, okay? And this might be getting a little too deep in the weeds, but I feel I need to cover this because I know there's someone out there that does have this question, all right? And what I've written down on my notes is saying multiple programs for one feed. So let's say you have one RSS feed, all right? And you want to create different styles of formats or maybe a different podcast within that particular one feed, all right? So that one feed that you're seeing on iTunes might have different programs, maybe from different podcasters, but it's all part of the same, I guess you could say, network you want to say, all right? Would that be effective for you and your podcast? This can be a differing opinion. It's going to be, it can be controversial. I don't feel that it is effective because when you're creating an RSS feed, people are buying into you and they're buying into the content that you are creating. So let's give you an example. Let's say you do have a photography podcast and all you talk about on Mondays is photography, and your photography podcast lasts about 2 hours and then you're done. Then Tuesday rolls around and there is a podcast that is on your particular feed that is about video editing, and it kind of relates to photography, but it's all kind of within the same area. You could do that too, but I don't recommend it. So what I recommend that you do is you just stay within the niche of what you're talking about, because you're going to gather more people who will want to listen to what you have to say within that area, because that's what people are searching for. So let's just take it to the other extreme. Let's say it's all about entertainment and it's about comedy. If it's about comedy, let's think about a niche. Is it about true crime? And this is something that definitely works. If it's about true crime, that will work. It can be comedy based and it can be tongue in cheek. It has been done. It's been done by my friends in Small Town Murder and Crime and Sports. Jimmy Wisman and James Petrogallo have successfully done this. All right. But what they did do and what they were very conscious of doing is that they said, we're going to create two different feeds for the two different podcasts, because we just can't put Small Town Murder inside of Crime and Sports. It doesn't make sense. It's not going to make sense. It's still the same format, but it's two different programs. So keep your podcasts and the name of your podcast the same, and just do one piece of content or focus on one piece of the niche within that podcast, because that will help you gather more listeners. If you're erratic and you're all over the place, it's not really going to help you out, because you're going to have sporadic and erratic listeners coming in and they won't know what to expect. So when you go in and you create your podcast, give your listeners a reason to know what they should expect whenever they come in and listen to your podcast. It will help them out much more for their search purposes, and it'll help you out later on down the line to build more authority. So if you like this video, go ahead and leave it a thumbs up. And of course, down below, you can hit the subscribe button and the little bell button. When you hit that bell button, it will also notify you when I drop a brand new video onto my YouTube channel. And of course, subscribe. I said that already. Subscribe, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend of yours who you think that this video might help them out. I certainly hope that I answered Shiv's question. If I did not clarify it, let me know, Shiv, and I will do a follow-up video and hopefully clarify a little bit more. And if you're starting this podcast game for the very first time, all you got to do is download my essential equipment guide that I'm going to leave right up here in the video card or down below in the description below, so that you can check that out. And that will share with you all the equipment, kind of like this mixing board that I have right here. This is my Yamaha MG10XU mixing board, and this is what I use for all of my podcasting projects, and this is what I use to record for these YouTube videos as well. It will have that piece of equipment and many other pieces of equipment, so go check that out. It's a free download, and it'll help you get started with your podcasting journey. And there's all kinds of other content that I have on my website over at theshannonman.com. All that is down, of course, in the link description below. Did that make sense? The link description in the description below with all the links. That's what I meant to say. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and leave you with a video down here, over here on the left-hand side, or is it right-hand side? I can't remember. It's going to be a playlist or a video that will help you in your podcasting journey. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for tolerating all of my mistakes today. It's been a long week for me, but I appreciate you guys showing me the support. It means so much to me, and we'll see you next week.